Welcome to the Education Marketing Leader podcast with Chris Raposo. If you're looking to dive into the latest industry insights, draw inspiration from education success stories, or just want to sharpen your marketing skills, you're in the right place. Here, we bring you a diverse range of voices from experts and leaders in the field, offering you a unique blend of professional development and practical strategies. Whether you want to understand your audience better, stay updated with the latest tech trends in marketing, or expand your professional network, we've got you covered. So while you're driving on your morning commute or winding down after a busy day, let's explore the dynamic world of education marketing together.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Education Marketing Leader with Chris Raposo. Today is a special day. Today is the 100th episode of my podcast, and I could not have a better guest. Today is the man who helped me inspire this podcast series and helped me start off. His name is Voltaire Santos Miran, and he is the Executive VP of Creative at Carnegie. Voltaire, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Chris. It's an honor to be here.
Well, it's an honor to have you on the show. So, quick background, I met Voltaire about a year and a half ago, or almost 2 years, at AMA Higher Ed in Washington, D.C., and I saw him present with a client of his, Interlochen Center for the Arts, on storytelling. And I was so enthralled by the conversation, by the presentation, that I approached him afterwards, and we met for a Zoom call. And he told me about his favorite book called The Storytelling Animal by 𝐤𝐻𝐤𝐬𝐿, which I dove into, and we kept talking about it. I wrote a recap on our call, and that's how the podcast was birthed, because I saw such engagement on it. So you can thank Voltaire, if you're a fan of the Education Marketing Leader podcast, for him helping me inspire this. But Voltaire, as we talked about storytelling a little bit, you are an expert when it comes to storytelling. You are creative. Can you give us a little bit of an insight of why is storytelling such a critical tool for universities when it comes to creating emotional connections with prospective students and alumni?
Oh, absolutely. And I've got to say that I would say storytelling is not only important for marketing higher education, storytelling is just basically infused into all of our lives. When you look at what story does and how long story has been around and the role that story has played for individuals and society, you realize that we are, as Jonathan Gottschall says in his book, really wired for story. It is something that impacts us not just at the intellectual level, but at the emotional level where decisions are made. And I think that particularly in this age of high technology and information saturation, what people look for more and more is authentic human connection. And story is a prime tool to help us connect with each other and with ourselves. So being able to see beyond the stats, and the stats are important, right? Because it's important for people to know what the student to faculty ratio is, and how many people graduate within 4 to 5 years, and how many people have a job within 6 months of graduation. Those are important details that speak to the promise of education. But when you talk about finding the place that you belong, finding the best fit college or university, the way that you learn that is through story, through the telling of narratives of real human beings going through an experience that you can identify with and that you can connect with. So I think that the institutions that are best at marketing understand that marketing is all about human connection and story.
Yeah, absolutely. Connection, especially Gottschalk in the book, he told a story as he was driving home, and it drives home the point of an emotional connection. So he said he drove home from dropping off his daughter somewhere, and a country song came on the radio, which he would usually, right? He would usually change it right away, but it was a song called Stealing Cinderella, where it's basically a story about a dad bringing in where the boyfriend shows up and asks the dad for the hand of the daughter. And the boyfriend sees all these pictures of that little girl, right? And he realizes in that moment that even though he will ask the dad for the hand, he's taken that most precious girl from that father and ask him him to entrust him with that precious jewel, which brought tears to his eyes, so much so that he had to pull over and he cried about it, because that story just took him away from where he was at a certain place and took him to that living room. And that's the power of story. When you tell a story for potential students, for example, if you communicate where they are right now and where they could be, right, paint a better future. I think that was so beautifully said in that book.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't know if you know this, but he has put out another book that is really worth reading as well. It's called The Story Paradox.
Ah, okay. I'll have to look up that. But as a father right now, even when I told that story, I almost choked up because I have a little girl. So it's incredible. But we talked about the book, and we're going to talk about the book a little bit more. And you recommended a book, Storytelling Animal. So I just told you what stood out to me in that book. Is there any insights from the book that particularly spoke to you that are applicable for higher education marketers?
Oh, golly, yeah. When you think I when you think about the role that story plays, and he covers a lot of these in our lives, it helps to educate us, it helps us to pass on tradition, and it helps us to build community, it helps to break down barriers, it helps us to define ourselves, and it helps us to imagine our place within a community. All of those things are really important when you're talking about a student who's searching for the right place to be. And
Mhm.
so part of, I would say, really great storytelling for higher education is really taking the focus off the institution. I do a lot of presentations on storytelling, and at a certain point, I will ask something like, all right, who's the real hero of Back to the Future? And I will ask, is it Doc, or is it Lorraine? Is it Marty, or is it Marty's father? And people will raise their hands. Strangely enough, no one raises their hand for Lorraine, and I feel really bad for her because I mean she went through a lot in that movie. And then I will say, regardless of who you think the best story is, you know who never gets picked as the hero? The high school. And then I show a picture of the high school where they all are. And I think that the first thing that I took from reading the book is that we have to get ourselves out of the center of the frame as institutions. We like to talk a lot about what our college does or our university does. And the fact is that we're not the hero of the story. The hero of the story are the students whose lives we get to help shape to what they want to do and who they want to be. And so when we're able to put our students and our alumni at the center of the frame and say, we're the Yoda to their Luke Skywalker, then we're on the right path of how to tell great stories that are going to move people to action.
Yeah, definitely. So have you seen any common mistakes? You don't have to name it a university or an institution that you work with where they solely focused on rankings, on the great faculty that they had, and they just put the student to the wayside. Have you ever gone into anybody's, boardroom and said, "Hey, I see this, you should change it to this," and then you seen a transformation there?
Yeah, and the transformation is slow, okay? But
Mm,
most institutions, and this isn't a wrong thing, but most institutions will say the same thing to
mm,
their students. And they're typically like seven promises. So it starts off with faculty members who are the top of their field and experts at what they do, but who know your name and are committed to your personal success. And then there are going to be chances for global citizenship and leadership. And then they'll talk about the perfect intersection between a bucolic setting with state-of-the-art facilities, but a location that's close to industry so you can get internships, co-ops, jobs, and possibly relocate. And then they'll talk about the friends that you can make for life. And then they'll talk about the alumni network that is strong and has your back from the time you graduate to the time that you retire. There are like basically seven promises that we all make. And then we show the picture that we call at Carnegie, three under the tree. Yeah, the student with a backpack, beautiful summer-ish day or fall day, reading or learning or being somewhat engaged. Everyone does it. In fact, in the last webinar I did, we played something like University Promise Bingo. And I had these little promises, and like everyone got bingo because everyone was saying the same things. Now, that is reasonable because of the fact that those are table stakes. Everyone wants this. And so universities who talk about this are not wrong. It's just incomplete. It isn't really the start of story. Those are statistics that people share. It's important for them to know. But when you start to flip the script and when you start to focus on real stories of people who have gone out after being at an institution and done extraordinary things that they always wanted to do, then all of those stats take on new meaning. So when the institutions that I see who are doing the best storytelling have really flipped over time from talking about statistics and the things that every marketing person will talk about, and really focused on narrative. And the reason that I say that it takes a lot of time is because the best storytelling that we do is storytelling that occurs across the institution. And what I find a lot of times when I start to work with our clients is that there's some storytelling that's happening in admissions, and there's some storytelling that's happening in academics, and then someone is assigned to stories in alumni relations, and then someone else in athletics, and then someone else in advancement. And many of the stories that they tell are roughly the same about the same people. And so part of good institutional storytelling is coming together and breaking down those silos and figuring out how to tell fewer stories, but better stories together. Because the stories that will resonate for a prospective student with some reshaping are going to work for current students, for current parents, for alumni and donors. And so when we come to the table as a group of storytellers who are trying to tell this one story in an extraordinary way and thinking, you know what? We're going to create these assets for Instagram, and we're going to do this for TikTok, and we're going to use this photo and this part of the content for our alumni newsletter, and then we're going to have it on the website. Then you start to see the sort of power of coordinated, collaborative storytelling, because let's face it, it's so hard to produce content. Content is really good visual and editorial content are hard to create. And so we need to maximize all the work that we do and get the best possible usage out of that.
Yes, absolutely agree. And because it is so hard, that's why people fall back to those seven same things that you just mentioned earlier, because it is difficult. And that sameness, that everything's kind of looks the same, sounds the same when it comes to institutions in the United States, brings me to a wonderful section of the book, and I'm going to read it out because it's stuck with me over the last year and a half since I've read it. And it kind of showcases how even though sameness is there, you can always find a unique angle. So it's page 53 in the book. So the idea that stories slavishly obey deep structural patterns seems at first vaguely depressing, but it shouldn't be. Think of the human face. The fact that all faces are very much alike doesn't make the face boring or mean that particular faces can't startle us with their beauty or distinctiveness. As Williams James once wrote, there is very little difference between one man and another, but what little difference there is very important. The same is true of stories.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the book talks about the 5 stages or the 5 arcs of a story. So the way that Pixar would describe it is once upon a time, until one day, and because of that, until finally. And I think that as marketers, we tend to want to tell stories that no one else has told and find forms that no one else has deployed before. But there should be something freeing and understanding that the pattern of story is something that is wired into us, and it's not finding the goal should not be to find a way to tell a story in a completely subversive way, but basically to tell stories that are authentic and true. And when I talk with clients, I talk about using an analogy that's close to what Jonathan Goshall uses. I use a watch face. And I say, well, when you think about a watch face, Yet what you see are basically 12 numbers, two hands, and maybe a spinning third hand typically. But then I'll ask people to take off their watches and show each other their watches, and you look at the amount of innovation and creativity and ingenuity that you see in something as simple as a watch face. And you realize that story follows the same sort of pattern where you might have those five pieces of the narrative arc, and without conflict, for instance, without that until one day, it's not really a story. But what makes stories great and what makes stories our own, what makes stories the stories that only we can tell, are our details.
Yeah. That brings me to the next point, is diversity, which you just mentioned, with the different watch faces. Even though they're all the same function, they're completely different. And with the demographic enrollment cliff hitting the United States next year, which particularly affects smaller institutions and community colleges, where they have to look outside the box. If you're usually used to only attracting the traditional age student coming right out of high school, there's going to be a dip in enrollment numbers, so you have to diversify as it comes to adult learners, other non-traditional students, and international students. How do you advise a university or a college to tailor your storytelling to resonate with diverse audience like international students, but not lose the core message of their institution, still stay true to themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I would say that the way to start storytelling that is going to be resonant with specific audiences is to really build a sense of empathy for that audience, to understand what it is that they're going through, what road they're walking, and what is going to make a difference in their lives. So I can give you an example. In fact, I was just talking with a colleague of mine, Emily Kittrell from the National Institute for the Study of Transfer Students. And we did a study together several years ago. And it was such an eye-opening study to me because when I first considered transfer students, what I thought of was, the typical student who would go to community college for 2 years in order to get rid of their gen ed requirements and then go to the four-year institution that they wanted to finish at, but they didn't want to pay 4 years of tuition at. And so when I started the research project with her, that was in my mind. And it completely blew my mind when I realized that there are probably a dozen different types of transfer students. There are stop in, stop out students who are 40, 45 years old. And the biggest question they have going back to school is, am I going to be the oldest one in the class? I don't want to be the oldest one in the class. And can I actually do well? Because the first time I wasn't all that great at school, right? Or you've got that person who has swirled around and has moved several different places and has taken one credit here and one credit here, who really is like rudderless and needing some guidance. And there are countless other segments within the transfer market. And it was only when I spent time with Emily trying to figure out what their journey looked like that I understood what was important to them. And understanding what was important to them, you can shape that story to speak to those touch points and really address the fears that they have, and then the hopes and the dreams that they have as well. So that's my go-to technique for telling stories that resonate, is to spend time trying to understand, respect, and think of how I can enrich the journey of the people that I'm trying to serve, not so much what has my institution done that is so great.
Yes, absolutely. If people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care, and showing that empathy, that you know what they're struggling with, you know what their fears are, and you address them ahead of time so that it cannot be an excuse for them not to move forward into the direction that makes them successful ultimately by going through your program and finishing their degree and building a better life for themselves, is incredibly valuable internally, but also externally, because you're doing what you're supposed to do. Why is an institution there? It's for the betterment of the community and the people that go through it. Now, we talked a little bit about AI earlier. I've been dabbling with AI quite a bit. Are there some digital tools available, that you recommend without losing the voice of the institution? Or how do you suggest university marketers balance technology to enhance their storytelling abilities, but still remain authentic and human?
Yeah. So I'm going to say something that is probably, I don't know, some people might get upset with me for this, but I like AI. I mean, honestly, let me give you an example. I do experience map work to help clients build empathy for their institution, or the people they're trying to serve at their institution. And I typically will, when building an experience map, I will spend an hour interviewing someone who represents their audience, and then I will spend 7 hours reviewing that transcript and going over it with a fine-tooth comb and identifying thoughts, feelings, actions, and core beliefs. And when you think about, 10 interviews, which is usually what it takes to do a good experience map, that's 70 hours of just reading through the transcripts. And with the help of ChatGPT, I was able to streamline my process from 7 hours per transcript to an hour and a half per transcript. That is amazing. And the thing that I love about ChatGPT is that it does not have human fatigue. At a certain point, you get to the third transcript and it is like slogging through mud because you're tired. And I confess that by the time I get to the third transcript, I have far fewer data points highlighted because I'm like done at that point. ChatGPT doesn't have that sort of fatigue factor. So I love leveraging for the tools for things that it can do more efficiently than me. When it comes to creativity, I would be hard pressed to find any professional communicator who's going to say, "Oh my God, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude did so much better writing this than I ever could." We're better at writing. We're better at the creative spark as human beings. And so I use ChatGPT as a way sometimes to bounce silly ideas or to sum up information or to give me 10 alternatives for 3 headlines that I've written just to see if something more interesting comes out. Now, not 70% of the time, I'll throw that out and I'll say that was a great try, thank you. But it's just nice to have a tool to play with, and also to realize in using that tool that as a skilled professional communicator, I have some job security because AI is not as good at the sheer creativity that's required for our job. It can
That
automate, it can help add efficiencies, but in everything that we do at my company, human beings remain at the heart of the work. And AI is basically another tool. And I said this to one of my colleagues. There's going to come a time where AI is going to be like spell check. Everyone is going to be using it's baked into like Google Docs. It's getting baked into Microsoft. It's going to be so ubiquitous that people will be like, "Oh, that's AI. I didn't even realize that," because it's just baked into the tools that we have.
yeah.
And I think that people should look at AI as a tool to help, not something to fear, not something that will either diminish their value or replace them.
That's exactly what I agree with as well. I mean, it's a beautiful case study, but just mention how you cut down 70 hours of research into an hour and a half, because that frees up that time for you to strategically drive your company forward. And it's the same with higher ed marketers. They can use that time that is safe to further their academic institution there. So don't fear it. ChatGPT is a wonderful tool. I use it all the time. Perplexity I use for research, but as you said, don't lose the human touch. As humans, we tend to get lazy, and if we feel that perhaps we can utilize AI to do our writing for us, it may feel good at the beginning, but it'll get us into hot waters because there's a learning curve where, when we became writers, where we honed our craft and we became better, but there's also a forgetting curve. Like if you stop writing and stop thinking about the way you structure sentences and how you communicate and let AI do that, over time, it'll chip away on your intellectual property there as well. So you got to be very careful with that.
Yeah.
So as you said, keep the human touch and do the creative thinking yourself, and don't let AI take over, because that's how you get replaced at the end.
Anne Handley just put out her latest. I think if it wasn't in her latest newsletter, it was in the newsletter before, where she talks about the first draft is the creative draft. That's the one that you have to work hardest at. That's the one you don't use AI for, and then you can bring it in. But the first draft, you do the hard work.
That is actually what I'm referring to, because I get her I get her newsletter too. So I kind of stole the idea, even though I'm learning from her. I actually responded to her email and told her a little bit about my experience with AI, and so she wanted to learn a little bit more. So I have to respond to her. Anne Handley's newsletter, subscribe to it. Good nuggets in there.
It's awesome.
Yes. Let's go back to the episode though. How can universities use storytelling not just for recruitment? Because we all have our quotas as marketers that we have to hit. We have to account for the money that we spend on activity. So how do we not just use it for recruitment, but also to retain current students? Because that's really important right now with the enrollment cliff. If there's no longer that influx of people coming in, you got to make sure that the ones that are there are going to stick around. And then how do you build the lasting relationships with alumni? Do you get them involved? You do student takeovers. You make them feel heard, feel seen, feel important. How do you do that?
Oh golly, there are so many techniques for pulling in people to storytelling. And when you think about storytelling for recruitment and retention, the use of students for, bringing students in, for instance, to produce most of the content that goes on TikTok, really, really smart. Having students do takeovers, really, really smart. So I think that there are numbers of well-trodden ways that people can involve different audiences in the generation, the sort of crowdsourcing of stories, and that makes the stories more authentic and more fun. So there's that. There's also, going back to the idea that we talked about earlier, is the same stories that will resonate for a prospective student with some recasting will work for a current student, will work for a donor, will work for alumni. So finding out how to tell stories better together is, I think, an imperative. And when you think about the way universities are structured, you realize that one office alone might not have all, particularly in smaller institutions, might not have all of the talent, all the expertise they need. But if you look across the institution, I'll bet you'll find someone who is really good at organic social media, someone who is a great photographer and videographer, someone who is a great analyst, someone who is a great strategist, someone who's a great writer. So you pull them together, and then you figure out what stories you can tell that will touch the most people. And I think that if anyone who's listening to this podcast wants a really great example of the longevity of storytelling at the institutional level, take a look at the University of Washington and the Boundless campaign. They have put out dozens of stories over time that are just so beautifully done, that bring together visuals, illustrations, infographics, long form storytelling, but also deploy those stories across social, across paid advertising. And I got the chance to interview the gentleman who headed that team, and he shared some really great insights about how they approach this and how they measure success. And I look to them as a really great example of what institutional storytelling can be when you have the support and the buy-in from people across the campus to create a one view of the University of Washington.
Yes, one voice. Absolutely. Absolutely. I love that idea of bringing those people in, because I recently had those students, right, having to takeovers, but also pulling the talent that you have on campus, because you have these Gen Z students that speak the voice and speak the tone of the prospects that a university has. So to bring them in, they can align, they know what triggers somebody, what clicks for somebody. And I recorded an episode last week with somebody. She heads social media for a university in the Midwest. And she started there as a student intern and worked her way up to a director of social media over the last 6 years. And she helped her institution get into the top 10 rankings of the 2024 Higher Education Social Media Engagement Report. It's a small private university, and she's outdone like these R1 schools. And it's #1 in her state and 6th overall in the United States. So it's remarkable the talent that you have on campus when you get them involved.
Absolutely.
So we talked about Interlaken earlier a little bit, Interlaken Center for the Arts. You presented on it. It moved me emotionally when I saw the video there, really. And I have no affiliation with Interlaken. So that was another thing about the presentation. I was like, holy cow, why am I getting teary-eyed seeing this beautiful ad of the university, right? And having these people speak about their experience and what brought them there and why they stay there and why they recommend other people to go there. So you can talk about this particular campaign, or is there another recent story, campaign that you worked on that you think that they really did a good job reinforcing the brand identity?
Well, let's stick with the Interlaken example because it is very near to and dear to my heart, and it was a labor of love. And I just love the fact that you got a little teary-eyed when you saw the videos. That's awesome. And it was such an interesting project because that project came together for the most part during the heart of the pandemic. And we actually had to work together remotely to put together those videos. Interlaken was on a complete lockdown, so no one was allowed to come on campus, but they had a faculty member that could do the videos. And so we would like phone in and we would have these meetings where we planned things out. They would get the shots. The masks would come off for the duration of the shots. Then the masks went right back on, and that's how that entire thing came together. So the feat of pulling together creative during the pandemic was a story within itself. But I think the reason that that works so well is because we were able to capture the sort of joy of creative discovery. And when you look at, and these are basically students, these are high school students, and in some cases, day camp students. And for some of these people, they're just dipping their toes in the creative waters. And then other of these students are like future Josh Groban's, who are like incredible, incredible musicians and performers. And I think that what we were able to do was, in a way, capture lightning in a bottle and show the sort of joy and show the act of discovery, but also the act of becoming not only proficient, but incredible at something that they have such a passion for. And when you see young people doing what they love and doing it incredibly, I mean, I'm getting a little choked up now talking about it because it's a magical thing and it's a magical place. And that was what we were trying to convey. And the coolest thing about that, which Catherine mentioned in our presentation, is for the most part, most of the videos that we show had no narration whatsoever, no words. It was basically performers and music. And even without that narration, even without the spoken word, it was incredibly powerful.
It was powerful. It was moving, and I wholeheartedly agree. And I hope it's still up there, the video, and for people to see on YouTube. Highly recommend it. If I find it, I'll put it in the show notes for others to watch. Job well done for sure in the face of adversity. So congratulations to you, to your team, and to the team of Interlaken as well on that.
Thank you.
As we bring the episode to a close, if you have a higher ed marketer here listening in and they want to be able to share stories that move folks to the brink of tears, what are some of the key elements that you would suggest they would start with?
Oh, well, so I would say that the state of the art of storytelling in 2024 is very highly visual. So when you take a look at how stories have evolved, digital storytelling has evolved. Like 10, 15 years ago, we had Snowfall. And Snowfall was this feat of digital storytelling that the New York Times did. It cost more than $100,000, I believe, at the time, and it took months to produce. And over time, what I have watched and what has evolved is that we realize that we need to tell stories in smaller chunks. So photos, for instance, should be able to live by themselves and a caption in Instagram and be a story, or a video should be able to live by itself. And then you should be able to pull all of these assets together and ladder up to a different story, or to a larger story and a more impactful story. So what I would say is, in figuring out how to tell stories that move people to tears or touch people emotionally, begin with empathy, understand what is going to be important to your audiences, and then capture assets, visual assets and multimedia assets that can tell that story very quickly and beautifully. Because frankly, we as human beings process visuals faster, far faster than we process the written word. And when you're trying to capture someone's attention, a photograph, short video are going to work even more quickly and impactfully than a beautiful set of paragraphs. So I would start there.
As they say, a picture's worth 1,000 words. And if you get the right one, don't be shy to pull out your iPhone and take a picture of it, of a moment that you cannot recreate ever again. Wonderful episode. Voltaire, thank you very much for being part of the show, for helping me start the show. This was show number 100. Everybody who's listening in and been following the show, I appreciate all of you, all the guests. Thank you for being a part of this. It's been a wonderful experience. Voltaire, how can people get in touch with you?
You can email me if you would like at vsantosmiran@carnegiehighered.com. You can also find me on the Carnegie site. So if you look under our team, I think my photo and my email are there.
I'll tag you in the recap so people can find you easily.
That sounds great. Thank you, Chris. This was an honor. I really appreciate your inviting me to talk. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. The honor was all mine. I really appreciate you, and we'll talk soon. You take care.
You too. Take care.
Hey, thanks so much for tuning into the show today. If you enjoyed it, don't keep it to yourself. Share with your friends in your network. And if you have a moment, I would really appreciate a review of the podcast. That'll help other people find the show as well. Tune in every Thursday morning at 8 a.m. when I release another episode. Take care now. Have a good one, friends.